There's something about abandoned hospitals and asylums that make your stomach turn. Maybe it's the endless hallways, the peeling paint, or the thought that thousands of people once lived here and a lot of times died behind these walls. These places were built to heal, but many became symbols of overcrowding, neglect, and some of the darkest chapters in American mental health history. Today, some of these massive institutions have been demolished, others sit abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by nature, and a few have been preserved where you can actually walk the same corridors on guided tours and hear the stories of the patients who were once forgotten. In this video, we're counting down 9 of the most disturbing asylums and hospitals in America, from overcrowded psychiatric institutions to tuberculosis hospitals with heartbreaking histories. We'll explore what happened inside these walls, what remains today, and whether you can still visit them. So let's go ahead and step inside some of the most haunting places America has ever built. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum was supposed to be a place of healing. Instead, for thousands of patients, it became a place of overcrowding, suffering, and tragedy. When the asylum opened in 1864, it was designed to hold just 250 patients. But by the 1950s, more than 2,400 people were living inside these walls. Patients were packed into wards, sleeping in hallways, and overcrowded rooms. People suffering from epilepsy, alcoholism, depression, and even conditions that would be considered mental illnesses today could find themselves committed here. As conditions worsened, so did life inside the asylum. Patients endured restraints, isolation, hydrotherapy, and in some cases, lobotomies. What was intended to be a hospital became increasingly difficult to manage. One of the most disturbing stories from the asylum involves a patient named Dean. According to local accounts, Dean was a harmless man who shared a room with 2 violent patients. One night, they attacked him. After an initial attempt to kill him failed, they forced his head beneath the metal bed frame and jumped on the bed until he was crushed to death. The story became one of the asylum's most infamous tragedies and chilling example of how dangerous conditions had become. But Dean isn't the only spirit said to remain here. Perhaps the most famous legend is Lily, a young girl who supposedly spent much of her short life in the asylum before dying of pneumonia at just 9 years old. Today, visitors leave her toys, and many claim they've heard a child's laughter echo through the halls or felt a small hand tugging at their clothing. Today, you can tour the asylum, walk through the patient wards, explore the treatment rooms, and hear the stories of people who lived and died here. Whether you believe the ghost stories or not, one thing becomes clear very quickly. The real history of this place is haunting enough on its own. Imagine being a child, dropped off at a place your parents were told would help you, only to spend decades trapped behind its walls. This is Letchworth Village in Thiels, New York. When it opened in 1911, Letchworth Village was considered one of the most progressive institutions in America for people with developmental disabilities. It sat on more than 2,000 acres and was designed to be a self-sufficient community where residents could learn skills and live productive lives. But as the years passed, that vision fell apart. One of the most heartbreaking stories is that of Lillian White, a young patient who disappeared from Letchworth in 1922. Staff claim she had just wandered away. In the spring of 1922, her remains were discovered by a young boy picking flowers on the mountain. They learned that Lillian had been having an affair with an older employee at Letchworth, and an argument led to her death. As more patients arrived, conditions became increasingly crowded. By the 1950s, nearly 4,000 people lived here. Some children's dormitories became so overcrowded that dozens of boys were forced into spaces never intended for that many residents. In the 1940s, photographer Irving Haberman was allowed inside and captured shocking images. His photographs showed children sitting naked on floors, residents packed into sterile rooms, and patients who appeared severely neglected. The photos exposed a reality that most New Yorkers had never seen. Another disturbing chapter involved medical research. During the 1950s, some child residents were used in studies related to the development of polio vaccines, raising ethical questions about whether vulnerable institutionalized children could truly consent. Then, 1972, investigative reporter Geraldo Rivera helped expose conditions inside institutions like Letchworth and Willowbrook. Viewers watched scenes of overcrowding, neglect, and residents living in conditions many people believed were unfit for human beings. Public outrage finally forced officials to act. But perhaps the most haunting place today is the cemetery. More than 900 former residents were buried here beneath simple, numbered markers instead of names. Many families never came back for them. Some were children who spent most of their lives inside Letchworth and were remembered only by a number. Letchworth Village finally closed in 1996, but you can still visit parts of the grounds and the cemetery today. Standing among those numbered graves, it's impossible not to wonder how many stories were lost behind these walls. When people think of Oregon State Hospital, they usually think of the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But one of the most haunting places wasn't in the movie at all. It was Ward 81, the state's only locked, maximum security psychiatric ward for women. In 1976, photographer Mary Ellen Mark and therapist Karen Folger Jacobs were given extraordinary permission to spend more than a month living alongside the women on Ward 81. They didn't just visit, they ate with them, talked with them, and listened to their stories every single day. What they found challenged nearly every stereotype about mental illness. Many of the women had survived horrific abuse, abandonment, or trauma long before they ever arrived at the hospital. Some struggled with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, others had nowhere else to go. Behind the locked doors were women who laughed together, danced in the hallways, cried over lost families, and desperately wanted someone to see them as people instead of patients. One patient, known in the project as Lori, became one of Mary Ellen Mark's most recognizable photographs while quietly sitting in a bathtub, lost in thought. Another, Mona, spoke openly about her dreams and fears despite spending years confined to the ward. To protect their privacy, many of the women chose to use different names during the project, but their voices were finally heard through interviews and photographs. The ward itself was always locked. Long fluorescent hallways, heavy steel doors, constant supervision, and little privacy became everyday life. Many patients had been institutionalized for years, and some had begun to wonder if they would ever leave. The photographs and interviews were eventually published in the groundbreaking book Ward 81, giving the world one of the most honest portrayals of life inside an American psychiatric hospital. Instead of portraying the women as monsters or movie villains, Mark showed their humanity, the friendships they formed, the loneliness they endured, and the resilience they somehow managed to hold on to. Today, Ward 81 no longer exists in its original form, but its legacy remains one of the most powerful reminders that behind every locked door was a real person with a story. And sometimes the darkest history isn't found in ghosts or legends. It's found in the way society once treated its most vulnerable people. If you drove past this massive stretch of farmland in northeast Philadelphia back in 1907, you would have thought it was absolutely beautiful. It was originally built as a progressive sanctuary called Byberry City Farms, a place intended to genuinely care for people, but history has a way of turning good intentions dark. By the 1940s, a toxic mix of budget cuts and societal neglect turned Byberry into an absolute living nightmare. The tragedy didn't just happen in secret. The people at the very top knew exactly how bad it was. In 1939, the state hired a well-respected psychiatrist named Dr. Herbert Woolley to fix the chaotic conditions. He tried his best, but the sheer volume of patients being dumped on his door by a society that didn't care made his job impossible. He was so deeply haunted by the overcrowded, unsafe wards that he gave a staggeringly honest interview to Time magazine, admitting to the press, "I wake up at night in horror over this place." By the mid-40s, the facility was packed a shocking 75% over capacity. Staffing was so critically low that a single attendant was often left responsible for up to 400 patients at a time. During World War II, a group of young, conscientious objectors were stationed there for service, and what they saw absolutely broke them. They witnessed hundreds of patients kept completely naked in the ward simply because there weren't enough clothes or staff to help them. Knowing the world would never believe the sheer neglect, these young men secretly smuggled cameras into the facility. Their raw, stark photos ended up in the legendary Life magazine expose revealing Byberry's darkest secrets to the world. But if you want a story about pure human resilience, it's Anna Jennings. She arrived at Byberry in 1984, at just 24 years old, seeking shelter from severe childhood trauma. Instead, she faced immediate isolation and heavy restraints. But Anna was a brilliant artist. The staff actually admired her work so much they used one of her paintings on a hospital brochure. But Anna refused to let them use her talent to mask their cruelty. She risked everything to sneak out written accounts of the daily abuse to state advocates. Her stubborn bravery sparked a massive federal investigation. Thanks to Anna's persistence, Byberry was finally forced to close its doors for good in 1990. The state eventually bulldozed the entire campus to try and erase the stain on its history. The buildings are completely gone now, but if you visit these grounds today, the air still feels incredibly heavy. Byberry stands as a chilling reminder of what happens when society decides it's easier just to lock its vulnerabilities away in the dark and forget about them. This looks like an abandoned campus in the middle of Georgia, but behind these buildings are stories that are a lot harder to look at. This is Central State Hospital. It was once one of the largest psychiatric hospitals in the world. When it opened in 1842, the goal was treatment, but by the mid-1900s, the patient population had exploded. At its peak, more than 12,000 patients lived here, and as overcrowding grew, conditions became increasingly difficult. People weren't always admitted for reasons we'd recognize today. In different eras, patients could be institutionalized for things ranging from severe mental illness to conditions and behaviors that modern medicine would approach very differently. Treatments changed over time, but some are hard to hear now. Patients at facilities like this could experience long-term institutionalization, heavy sedation, insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, and even lobotomies. ECT is still used today in modern medicine under controlled conditions and is very different from how earlier psychiatric care is often imagined. But historical treatment environments could be much harsher, less individualized, and sometimes poorly understood. Former accounts from large institutions across that era described crowded wards, loss of privacy, limited staffing, and patients spending years or decades inside. Today, portions of Central State still operate, but large areas remain quiet and abandoned. And standing here, what feels unsettling isn't just the empty buildings, it's knowing that behind every window, there was a person. Deep in the woods of Rockville, Indiana, sits a massive decaying complex. Today, it's an abandoned ghost town, but a century ago, it was a place of quarantine, despair, and death. This is Indiana State Sanatorium. It opened in 1908, and this facility was built to combat the White Plague, or tuberculosis. In an era before antibiotics, doctors believed the only cure was freezing cold air and total isolation. Thousands of contagious patients were sent here. For many, it was a one-way trip. It's estimated that between 2,500 and 4,000 people died within these walls. Those whose families couldn't afford a funeral were buried in unmarked graves in the property's forgotten Potter's Field. But the darkness didn't end when tuberculosis was cured. In 1968, the complex became a psychiatric center and nursing home. The isolation remained, but the tragedy shifted. Decades of state records revealed grim reports of patient neglect and staff abuse. And one bizarre incident, an orderly with a history of elder abuse met a sudden end, struck by a car while fleeing the property. Because the facility lacked secure doors, multiple vulnerable psychiatric patients walked off the 200-acre property and died nearby. Just one instance, in January of 2002, a female resident escaped and died of hypothermia right outside the facility. The facility took in violent psychiatric patients from a closing facility upstate to stay profitable. They mixed them into the general population without adequate staffing, resulting in severe patient-on-patient assaults. There are multiple documented cases of patients jumping from the roof and attempting suicide. And in 2009, long after much of the campus sat abandoned, a workplace dispute between two facility employees escalated into horrific murder-suicide. This is only a glimpse into the horrific things that happened at Indiana State Sanatorium. Make sure to subscribe to our channel because next week we'll be releasing the full video where we dive into all of the dark history, the patient stories, the ghost stories, and why this place looks like it's just frozen in time. If you've ever wondered how a place could become one of the biggest scandals in American history, let me tell you about Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, New York. Opened in 1947 for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, Willowbrook was built for about 4,000 residents, but by the mid-1960s, more than 6,000 people were crammed inside. What happened next was horrifying. When Senator Robert F. Kennedy visited in 1965, he described the institution as a snake pit. Residents lived in overcrowded wards, often sitting naked on filthy floors. Many lacked proper clothing, hygiene, or basic care. One of the most heartbreaking stories is that of Bernard Carabello. Bernard had cerebral palsy but was mistakenly labeled intellectually disabled and spent 18 years trapped at Willowbrook. Unable to communicate clearly because of his condition, he was treated as if he didn't understand what was happening around him. Years later, he became one of the most powerful voices exposing what happened inside those walls. Then there's a scandal involving medical experiments. Between the 1950s and early 1970s, researchers intentionally exposed children to hepatitis in controversial studies. Some children were fed material containing the virus so doctors could study how the disease spread. Many medical professionals later condemned the testing. Then there's Renee, who was a 12-year-old girl with physical and developmental disabilities who had lived at Willowbrook since 1955. On June 21, 1965, she died after being strangled by a restraint strap while sitting unattended in a chair. Staff claimed she had slipped through the chair and the strap tightened around her neck. The school's director later admitted that that type of restraint involved was not approved and should not have been used. The story finally reached the public in 1972 when journalist Geraldo Rivera secretly filmed inside the facility. His documentary, Willowbrook: The Last Great Disgrace, showed residents lying on floors, crowded together in filthy conditions, and suffering from neglect and abuse. The footage shocked the nation and sparked lawsuits demanding change. Public outrage eventually led to reforms and the school's closure in 1987. If you visit Willowbrook today, one of the most meaningful things you can do is walk the Willowbrook Mile. It's a 2 to 2.5 mile memorial trail built on the former grounds of Willowbrook State School. Rather than hiding the history, the trail was created to make sure it's never forgotten. As you walk, you'll pass 12 interpretive stations that tell the story of the institution, from its opening in 1947 through the years of overcrowding and abuse to the activism that ultimately shut it down. The stations focus on former residents, family members, whistleblowers, and advocates who fought for change. St. Albans Sanatorium looks peaceful, sitting on that hill in Virginia, but the stories attached to this place are anything but. We explored one of the most talked about abandoned places in the state. Part history, part legend, and depending on who you ask, something much darker. Before it became a sanatorium, this property was a boys' Lutheran school, and it later became a treatment facility for psychiatric patients. Over the years, stories of suffering, overcrowding, and questionable treatments turned St. Albans into a magnet for ghost stories. One of the most talked about places in this building is the suicide bathroom, where there are at least 4 documented cases of young boys taking their lives after being bullied and tortured. Across institutions in that era, patients were often subjected to treatments that today would be considered cruel, ineffective, or deeply inhumane. One of those treatments was extreme hydrotherapy. Patients were forcibly wrapped, mummy-style, in towels drenched in ice-cold water. In some instances, they were left submerged in steaming, scalding water vats for days at a time. And there's a room here with one of the bathtubs that was used for that purpose. Another room that is talked about often and visited often is Jacob's room. The legend is that Jacob was a young boy who was dropped off at the hospital, basically abandoned, and he was isolated, mistreated, and was found dead in his bed. Paranormal investigators find that this is the most active room in the whole sanatorium. Whether it's true or not, we just don't know. There's not any historical documentation of Jacob, but a lot of the files and things were lost. It's a word of mouth, I heard this from someone or someone that worked here kind of situation. Now, there's tons more that we learned here, lots of stories, lots of history that we can't wait to share with you. We're doing our next episode of Dark History Destinations on Saturday, and it will be about St. Albans Sanatorium, and we will dive deeper into the history and what is real and what is not real and what just can't be proven. We got to visit the Molly Stark Sanatorium before it got demolished. It just got demolished in 2025, so just like a few months ago it was demolished, and we were here in 2023. Located in Ohio, the Molly Stark Sanatorium was one of the creepiest abandoned places in the state. Originally opened in 1930s, the sanatorium was built to treat tuberculosis patients during a time when there was no real cure. Patients were sent here for fresh air, isolation, and long stays that sometimes lasted years. As you can see, there was a barbed wire fence around the actual hospital, and there are places where people just cut through and went inside. We did not go inside the actual building. We did get a little bit closer, but we didn't go inside. There was, however, a couple there that did go inside, and they were kind of telling us like what they saw. We went to the window there, and they were in just they went upstairs and everything. Like, I couldn't take my kids in there because, you know, I guess that wouldn't be a responsible parent of me. If it was me by myself, I probably would have gone in. But they told us everything that they saw, which was really cool. This part was the superintendent's building, which was not fenced in at all. This was for the person in charge of the entire facility that lived, worked there, and would oversee the hospital grounds and staff. That wraps up our look at some of America's most disturbing asylums and hospitals. Every one of these places has its own story, but together they remind us how much mental health care has changed and how important it is to remember the people whose lives unfolded behind these walls. Whether these buildings are abandoned, demolished, or still open for tours, their histories deserve to be remembered and not forgotten. If you enjoy exploring the darker side of history, forgotten places, and destinations with incredible stories, make sure to subscribe because we've got plenty more to come, and a lot of these short videos in here have long form videos now that you can check out if you're interested in any of them. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.